בשנים האחרונות אנו עסוקים באבני ראשה, במטח ובכלל במערכת החינוך בישראל, בהטמעה מערכתית בת קיימא של SEL. בשיחה היום נרצה לשמוע תובנות מהעולם וללמוד ממי שמנהיגה את הארגון שמוביל הטמעה כזאת דרך עבודה עם קובעי מדיניות, דרך מחקר ודרך הפרקטיקה. It is a huge honor for me to welcome and introduce Dr. Aaliyah Samuel, President and CEO of CaaSel. Dr. Samuel has been the head of educational policy at National Governors Association. She has been the executive vice president of NWEA. She's a fellow at Harvard University and has been in the United States Department of Education. Welcome, Aaliyah.
Good.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you today?
Good, thank you. Before we dive into the conversation, a few facts about Dr. Samuel. She's a former special ed teacher and a school leader. She's a parent of 2 boys. How old are your boys?
They are 7 and 11.
Right, the 11-year-old met my daughter at school.
Yes.
She's a policy leader and previously worked under the Biden administration. She has traveled to 48 out of 50 US states and at least a dozen countries, and now Israel as well.
Now Israel.
She has lived in Panama and the US and speaks English and Spanish. Did you pick up any Hebrew during your visit?
I did. Amongst the delegation, we were keeping a vocabulary list of certain words. You can't quiz me, but I am practicing certain words. I am.
Okay, well, you can squeeze into the conversation a word or two if you want to.
Okay.
So I was looking at your very, very impressive bio and everything that you did. And when I looked at your choices of what you wanted to share with us as the few facts, I couldn't help but notice that the first 2 were a parent and an educator. And I wanted to ask you if you can tell me something about this choice.
Yeah. You know, I appreciate that question. And for me right now, it's actually all throughout my entire career, it's been important to bring the human side of the work. I think so often we get caught up in credentials or experiences, but at the end of the day, we're all humans trying to do the best we can, particularly in the world of education for the next generation. And so for me as an educator, the reason why I've made some of the career choices that I have has been because there's been a lack of educators at the table, lack of educators at the policy table. Very few educators get to help inform the curriculum decisions, the standards decisions. And I felt like after 10 years of being a public school educator, it was time to lend my voice in a different way. So that's why I feel it's always important for people to know I'm an educator first. And then when I had my children, it's such a different perspective on what it means to be an educator, because all of the skills and the experiences that you get in the profession of education, now you're tested with it with your own children.
I can totally relate.
Yes, and so, and also as a parent, we're trying to navigate this new world of education. What does it mean educating, coming out of the pandemic? And I'm right there with so many other, literally hundreds of thousands of millions of parents who are trying to figure this out as well. When the pandemic started, my youngest son was in kindergarten and my oldest son was in 3rd grade, and I was working full time.
Wow.
So many of us parents were trying to figure out, how do we work? How do we support our kids in virtual school? What does this pandemic mean? And I think being able to connect with other parents and let them know, I'm doing this every day just like you are, brings a certain level of credibility to the conversation. And so it's just always important to me to reflect, those that we serve, which are our parents, and then also those that we support, which are our educators.
Thank you. You spent years in policy making and in government doing very, very important things. What was it about the mission of CaaSel that so-called called you to join that mission?
Yeah, great question. One of the beauties of working in the policy world is that you really get a chance to see behind the scenes how certain policies are made. And one of the things I really believe in is not only having the human voice at the policy table, but being able to authentically use your voice. And I realized coming out of the pandemic, I had a chance to travel to over a dozen cities, talking to different governors, teachers, parents, And fundamentally, as we were returning to school after, coming out of the pandemic, everyone was talking about social emotional learning. 20 years ago, when I was a classroom teacher, we weren't necessarily using the word social emotional learning, but I was seeing it in the classroom every day. And so fast forward to now, and just really recognizing the need to think about education differently, to think about the needs of our students and our educators differently. This opportunity to talk about the foundation of the skills that social emotional learning brings, how it impacts not only the education setting, but out of school time, sports, music, all of the other things that kids are engaged in. But also, what does this mean for lifelong skills? What does it mean in adult relationships? How does it play out in the workforce? I really felt like it was an opportunity to use my experiences as an educator, as a parent, and as a policy influencer all at the same time to talk about the importance of SEL now more than ever and its role just in our society and really in the world.
It's interesting that you're talking about the pandemic and how it made you look at things. And, I think during the pandemic, a lot of people, even the non-believers in SEL, realized how important it really is and how it takes precedence. Sometimes it's at least as important as academics. I guess I'm wondering, now that the pandemic is hopefully almost over and life is kind of getting back into normal, how do we make SEL sustainable?
Yeah.
How do we make the awareness stay the same and make it sustainable?
So I think I'll answer that question in two ways. First, you talked about the increased awareness. And it was very interesting to see the dramatic increase of awareness. But fundamentally, even with that awareness, we were talking about it differently. For example, in education, we were talking about the impacts of the lack of socialization and how it was showing up in our kids, how being able to interact with their same age peers and the inability to raise their hand and wait patiently. We really saw it show up firsthand. We heard parents talking about the impact of the lack of play dates, the lack of prom or homecoming, or these opportunities for kids and young people to engage and how it started to manifest itself. We heard employers saying, it's so hard to rebuild our teams and make sure that our teams can engage and we have this strong culture. And the through line to all of that was the social emotional learning skills that we're talking about. And now as we think about how do we continue to sustain this, I think it's going back to that acknowledgement of how it showed up. Acknowledging that even though the world is opening back up, we're getting a chance to have more interaction, the importance of the social skills, the importance of understanding others' perspectives. And so I think not trying to go back to normal, but really defining what a new normal is going to be really important. And coming out of the pandemic, all of us are exhausted with Zoom calls. All of us are exhausted with the virtual world.
100%.
There's nothing like the human interaction. And so I think being able to emphasize the importance of that interaction and just how good it feels to be back in community together, I think is really important, because the world is not going to get any smaller, and we're not hopefully going to go back to normal. We'll create this new normal that really is focused on the relationships, because we saw how much we missed it during that time, particularly when we were at the peak of lockdown.
Okay. We're talking about SEL, so we can't just talk the talk, we have to also walk the walk. So let's look at the Castile wheel. And I want to ask you, CEOs are also people,
Yes,
humans.
We are. Yes, we are.
During this visit, what did you need to practice the most?
What immediately comes to mind, I would say, is the self and social awareness, and for different reasons. One is on the self-awareness side. I traveled with my children and my mom. And a big reason why I wanted them to come is because I knew this would be an extraordinary experience for us. I also believe in my children seeing what mommy does every day so that they have an understanding of why sometimes I'm away from home, why I work long nights. And so there's been a bit of self-awareness that I've had to have of how I support my children, how my children and my mom are even going through this experience, and what is it that I want to take away, but then also how do I help them have a sense of self-awareness so that they can have an openness to this experience as well, which is why also my boys had a chance to spend 2 days in an Israeli school. We're heading to another school later this morning because I want them to have also a self-awareness to understand that the world that they know and that they see is very small in comparison to the rest of the world. And so to understand a difference in perspective as well.
What did they say? What was their experience like?
Yeah, so the first day, because of the language barrier, they were very nervous of, will there be somebody there who understands my language? Will I be able to communicate? And the moment they were able to find another child who even spoke just enough English to be able to communicate, the bonds that they created right away, they did not want to leave, and they actually wanted to go the next day. And it has been so refreshing to see their confidence in who they are, but also their openness to other people. They also loved just the way different age groups interacted at the school. In the US, it's very constrained in the sense that you kind of spend the whole day with your own age group. And so being able to be with a diverse set of age groups, they really enjoyed. And then also the social awareness, because it is a different culture. There are cultural contexts that we needed to be aware of and understand. And so how to have that social awareness to really have your eyes and your heart open to another culture and understand why people do things a certain way, and really just take the time to learn it's been amazing. It's been amazing.
I heard that you also had to use a napkin at one of the events that you went to.
Yes. It has. There's been certain things just across, even terms that you all use. I'm like, that's not how we use it. But it has been an extraordinary learning experience. It really has.
Okay. You spent nearly a week in Israel, and I've seen and heard a lot about our unique challenges, about the implementation of SEL in our schools. And I'm curious to know what you have learned about how different or similar we are.
So I will say that there are some complexities that I've observed here in Israel. I mean, there are certain layers of understanding religion, of understanding gender, of understanding even regional differences that really play out here in Israel. But honestly, there's far more commonalities than there are differences. As I've traveled state to state, as I've talked to other countries who are trying to implement SEL, some of the commonalities that we're all facing, us in the US as well, as how do we engage parents? How do we make sure parents really feel like their decisions, their perspectives are honored and respected and integrated in the social emotional learning process? Helping to provide the right levels of professional development so our educators feel confident and competent to be able to not only teach these skills, but also showcase and have the adult capacity for these skills.
It's so important.
So important, and it's very common. And also trying to provide the right information to address the questions or misinformation around what is SEL. Because it is, for some, a new term. Even though social emotional learning has been around 30 years, for some it's new. Absolutely. And so how do we help broader constituents understand what SEL is and how it plays out? And honestly looking at it systemically to make sure that this is a systemic approach. And that is not unique to Israel. I mean, there's so many places that are grappling with the same issues. And so I have honestly found that when it comes to SEL and SEL implementation, many of the questions, challenges, and opportunities are really very the same.
And do you have any tips for us?
Well, I will say that one of the things that I think is a huge bonus for Israel is that you have the political will and support to be able to implement it. When you have your policymakers at the highest level supporting the implementation, and not just supporting, but displaying those skills as well, it really does help with the implementation. I would say my tip would just be, well, maybe it's a tip and advice. The tip would be to truly make sure that you're communicating with all constituents and all audiences so that one group doesn't feel left behind. Because it's really important that we talk about in our wheel we have the families, the communities, the parents, that you continue to engage all of those audiences in this initiative. And then I would also say just stay the course. You know, now more than ever, our schools need this, our students need it, our adults need it, and just really not let the challenges stop you from continuing to progress. It's just such a critical skill right now.
It's so important. When you're looking to the future, what do you see the future of SEL? What would be considered a success?
For me, when I think about the future and what success looks like when we talk about social emotional learning, is that we're no longer questioning the well-being being front and center. When we can start off by just having the recognition that no individual, no human can be their best without their social and emotional needs being taken care of. And I think the more that we begin to integrate it and really have a whole being, whole child, whole person approach, our society will be better, our students will have better outcomes, and they'll also feel more prepared for life. And that to me is what the future looks like. I think about a while back ago, I was asked, you know, what do you think about SEL and adults and the skills? Like, what's your hope? And coming out of the pandemic, if you look at the number 1 or 2 Googled things, it's how to manage anxiety, how to manage stress. When you look at, I don't know if you like TED Talks, I'm a big TED Talk watcher. The most viewed TED Talks are all about managing stress, anxiety, changes. Well, these are the skills that we're trying to teach our children now. So I can imagine a world where we no longer have adults who are Googling how to handle these real life challenges, but that they feel equipped with the skills from an early age to be able to handle stress, handle anxiety, how to build relationships. And so I know the work that we're doing around social emotional learning is a long run game. It's not something that happens overnight. We're not going to see the results tomorrow or next year. We'll see some, but the longevity of what we're trying to do will impact generations. And so my hope is that when our kids, because we have kids the same age, when they're adults, they feel like they are truly prepared for all that adulthood brings. And that to me is what the future of SEL looks like.
Well, that's another SEL skill, I guess, being able to not just wait for immediate results, right? So I think we're good with that.
Yes.
What does Caassel do to make that happen? Or can you maybe tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
So Caassel, Caassel stands for the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. So one of the things that we do and do well is we are collaborative. So we enjoy, and part of who we are is working with other people, other groups to understand how do we move this work forward. And I think now more than ever, as the field is changing, as the interest around SEL continues to grow, continuing to keep that collaborative nature. On the academic side, there's been a lot of questions around what is the role of academics in SEL, and shouldn't academics be more important than SEL, or should we be putting SEL first and then academics? and just continuing to underscore the importance of the two together. We really need them together. But at its core, Caassel is well known for three things. Our research. We have decades of research that show that approaches to SEL, these SEL skills, are really grounded in research that shows outcomes and evidence. So continuing to have research that we can put into the field, I think is really important. The other side is the practice side, and that's elevating the practices around social emotional learning and helping our educators understand the various practices of SEL that they can then implement. Caassel is not a curriculum or program provider. We have folks who do, that's outside of Caassel, but maintaining the framework of what social emotional learning is and making sure that we're putting that out into the field. And then the other is the policy side, because we know policy changes people's lives.
You immediately smile when you talk about policy.
Yes, I'm a policy wonk, I am. But policy changes people's lives, either for the better or for the worse. And so how can we influence really strong policies that will not only support social emotional learning, but support our educators and our students? And so those three foundational pieces are at the core of who we are and the work that we'll continue to do moving forward as well.
I'm sure you've seen in this week in Israel that even though we speak different languages, we speak the same SEL language. And we've been using a lot of the Caassel materials. Mm-hmm. What have you learned about your impact, about the Caassel impact globally?
Yeah. So I'm almost glad I didn't realize Caassel had the impact it did when they asked me to join the role, because I don't know if I would have said yes before. No, it's honestly, it is one of the things that continue to strike me the most about this opportunity is Caassel's footprint and brand is truly global and so highly respected. And as I think about the work of Caassel moving forward, as I think about the future of education and where Caassel and our work is situated, it's just so clear that the pandemic really opened up another door for us. And another door for us in the sense that the needs, the social and emotional needs of our people, our global people, have never been so up front and center than now. And so how do we continue to evolve on this journey and really support those needs? And with the evolution, for example, our research, we're now working in more places than we ever have before. So how do we continue to diversify our research and make sure that the evidence is there? So country to country or rural to urban, we have the right research, and also making sure that SEL continues to remain culturally relevant, because we know that all the while the foundation of these skills are the same, there are cultural nuances that we have to understand and embed into the approach of SEL. And so just as the world is kind of growing and learning, we have some growing and learning to do as well. But it's just such a huge opportunity to lean in and have impact in an area where we know is needed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Before we end, we will most likely have a lot of school leaders watching this video cast. Is there anything you want to say to them?
Yeah. So we know so much of the school culture, the classroom environment, even the community environment comes from the school. And how important and how critically important the school leader's role is in the implementation, in the adoption of social emotional learning. And so for the school leaders to know what they are doing will have not only extraordinary impact on their school community, but their overarching community. And so just to know that the recognition of the importance of leadership and their role is there. Great things happen when the leader is bought in and moving the work forward. I would also say to our leaders to all the while they are attending to the social emotional needs of their staff, of the kids, to not forget to take care of themselves. because school leaders so often will pour and pour and pour and forget to pour into themselves. And so as they're talking about these skills, to not forget their own needs, both socially and emotionally, and to take the time to take care of themselves as well.
Spoken by a real SEL leader. Dr. Samuel, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure talking to you. I sure have learned a lot. And we hope to see you again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Safe travels, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.